Okay, so we're going to go over practice quiz 2, question 2 in this video. So before doing that, let me give you a brief lecture on standard deviation and mean. So the mean is the average of a vector of numbers. So the symbol for mean is this Greek letter called mu. It's like a U. Here's a formula for mean. So this just says add up all the values. That's a mathematical way of saying that, and divide by number of values that you have. Okay, so to calculate mean, add up all the numbers, then divide by how many numbers there are. Okay, so that's the mean. The standard deviation, we'll look at an example in a second. The standard deviation is a measure of how spread out the numbers in a vector are. And the symbol for standard deviation is this Greek letter, which is called sigma. And here's the formula for sigma. Okay, so it looks kind of complicated, but it's basically saying take your vector values, subtract the mean, square it, add up all those results, divide by n, and then take square root. That's your standard deviation. And we call sigma squared the variance. Alright, so let's look at an example. So here's a practice quiz 2. Let me take this away. So practice quiz 2, part A. So it says find the mean and standard deviation for each of the vectors. There's A and B here. Okay, so here's B. Okay, so let's find the mean and standard deviation for A. So looking at how many values we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's note here, n equals 6. Okay, so let's start now computing. So we'll have our mu equals, and adding up all these 7s, dividing by 6. So doing that, we get then, so we get our mu, or our mean, will be adding up all the 7s, or 6 of them. So 6 7s, you add them up, it'll be 42 over 6. And 6 goes into 42 7 times, so our mean is going to be 7 here. Okay, let's compute the let's compute the variance next, then we'll do the standard deviation. Okay, so for the variance, how you're going to do it is you're going to take your first vector value, which is 7. So it'll be 7. Then you're going to subtract the mean, which is 7 also. And you're going to square the result. Then next, you're going to move on to the next vector value, which is 7 again. Subtract the mean, which is 7. Square the result. Keep doing that all the way. Going on to the next value, which is, there's all 7s for this vector, so it'll be 7 minus 7. And the fourth value in the vector is 7 also. 7 minus 7 squared. Fifth value in the vector is 7. And the sixth value in the vector is also 7. And we're going to divide this by 6. So you can see on top, they're all going to be zeros. There's going to be 0 over 6. And 0 over 6 is just 0, so our answer should be 0 then. Okay, so our answer is 0. And now, this is the variance, so to find the standard deviation, we just take square root. Because the square root of sigma squared would be sigma. So sigma would be the square root of 0, which is still going to be 0. So let me write that here. So our sigma then would equal the square root of sigma squared, which would be the square root of 0, which is just 0. So therefore, standard deviation is 0. And as we mentioned above, the standard deviation is measuring how spread out the vector values are here. You can see they're all 7s, so there's no spread. That's why the standard deviation is 0. Saying there's no spread. And that's basically saying that all the values are the same. If the standard deviation is 0, it would mean that all the values are the same in your vector, which they are here. Okay, let's move on to part B now. Okay, so part B, if you count the values here, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's like n is 6 here also. Okay, so let's let's start computing the mean. So let's do that. So we're going to, the mean will be just adding up all these numbers, dividing by 6. So doing that, we get then, so we get this then. So let you check on your calculator. If you go 14 plus 8, that's 22, plus 7, 29, plus 6, 35, plus 5, 40, plus 2, 42. So this ends up being 42 over 6. And that's also equal to 7. So you can see this has the same mean as the vector in part A. Okay, so now let's look at the standard deviation. Let's actually find the variance first, and then we'll take square root. Okay, so let's find variance here. Okay, so the variance, so sigma squared, what you do is you go through the vector, you're looking at the value. So the first value is 2, so it's going to be 2. Subtract your mean, so subtract 7, then square result. Then move on to next vector value. The next vector value is 5. It's going to be then 5 minus 7 squared. Move on to the next one, which is 6. 6 minus 7 squared. Moving on to next one, which is 7. 7 minus 7 squared. Move on to the next one, which is 8. So it'd be 8 minus 7 squared. And lastly, last one is 14. So it'll be 14 minus 7 squared. And this whole thing is divided now by 6. So let's work this guy out. Okay, so simplifying this further now. So it'll be 2 minus 7, that's going to be minus 5 squared. And then on here is 5 minus 7, that's going to be minus 2. So minus 2 squared. Next one to be 6 minus 7, that's going to be minus 1 squared. Next one will be 0, so it'll be I guess 0 squared. 7 minus 7. Then 8 minus 7 will be plus 1 squared. And then 14 minus 7 would be 7, so it'll be plus 7 squared. Okay, so let's keep going. So let's keep going here. So negative 5 squared, when you square a negative number, it becomes positive, and 5 times 5 is 25, so it'll be 25 there. Next one will be minus 2 squared, that's going to be 4. And next one's going to be negative 1 squared, which is 1. Then 0 squared, which is 0. Then 1 squared, which is 1. And 7 squared, which is 7 times 7, which is 49. So let's add these guys up. So in your calculator, if you add these up, you should get then, so adding them up, you get then 80 on top over 6. 80 can write as 2 times 40. 6 you can write as 2 times 3. You can cross off those 2's. So it becomes 40 over 3. And if you put out in your calculator 40 over 3, you can check it's roughly equal to 13.33 over here. Okay, so this is my sigma squared. And as you can see, it's not 0 this time like it was in the example above, because these values, there's some spread between them. Like the first example, they're all 7s. That's why the standard deviation was 0, because there's no spread between them. Here there is spread. So the standard deviation is kind of measuring the average spread around the mean, from the mean. So you can see that it's 13.33. So the bigger the standard deviation is, the more spread out the values would be around the mean. Okay, but we still haven't figured out this is the variance, so we need to take the square root on both sides to find sigma. So let's take square root on both sides. So doing that we get, so taking square root on both sides to find sigma, we get then, so sigma then will be square root of sigma squared, which will be the square root of 13.33. and you can plug that in your calculator that you check is roughly equal to 3.65. So that's our answer. Okay, so we're done with the question here. So we've shown the first question, A, the standard deviation was 0 because they're all the same values. B, the standard deviation was not 0 because they're not all the same values. So it ended up being 3.65. So it's giving you the average spread, how spread out they are around your mean. So on average, they're 3.65 away, either on the right or left of our mean. All right, so we're done with the question, so let's leave it there.